what was required. So let me see, I have some comments on your experiments. Basically, one of the things that all of you understood was the importance of framing. Yani, if you frame the projects as being, we are trying to build a hospital, this will have a different impact. And if it is a common lunch project, so people will visualize the problem. And why is this? Can anybody answer why? Why framing matters? Because economists don't understand. The economists are very confused about this. This is called the framing effect. So can you explain why framing matters? Yes?
Sir, basically framing matters because आपको बताती है कि आप किस तरह से सिचुएशन को देख रहे हैं. Especially सर इन prospect theory में सर जिस तरह से बात की थी कि framing effect जो आता है कि आप
see, what the economists say is that there is a clear-cut set of incentives. Yani in the voluntary contribution mechanism, you pay in something and you get something out. So that is what should drive the result. Why should it matter whether you describe it as being a hospital or whether being a shared lunch? It's what matters is money speaks, money talks. So why should it matter whether you describe it as a hospital or whether you describe it as a business?
हर शख्स के लिए different चीज़ों की different importance.
But yani we are playing for, yani so maybe so. Is it because you were playing for points and not for real money? If it was real money, then people would behave differently.
Sir, basically we are humans. We are not robots कि हम एक चीज को हर गवर्नमेंट एक ही तरीके से देखता है, हर गवर्नमेंट डिफरेंट तरीके से देखता है, और फिर हम जज करते हैं कि जनरलाइज करते हैं कि ज़्यादातर लोग.
But can you make the argument in terms which would be, yani, intellectually acceptable? Everybody sees things differently, but I am making a specific argument that look, here are the motivations. That the social optimum is obtained when everybody contributes everything to the pot. ये तो आप लोगों को भी नहीं समझ में आता. यानी achieving a full cooperation is when everybody puts in everything. It is not when the hospital gets built, if everybody makes a sufficient contribution. And you see, in the equilibrium that you arrived at in your experiment, some people are free riding, some people are benefiting from others. So what I wanted you to do was to construct an experiment where there would be no free riding, there would be full cooperation. You did not succeed. And similarly, I wanted you to construct an experiment where there would be full free riding, nobody would contribute anything. You did not succeed. So the question is, we need to understand what are the factors which create cooperation and what are the factors which lead to failure to cooperate. ये बात थी. This is what I wanted you to learn from your experiments. So एक suggestion किताब में provisioning का था, which was tried and worked little bit, not fully, in the sense that if you provision at a certain break point, then people would often come up to that break point. उसमें भी your experiment में तुमने ये नहीं लिखा. You didn't explain whether you had provisioning with payback or not. So actually provisioning with payback works. Provisioning without payback does not work. That's what the textbook told us. And I think some of the experiments were not run in that way. But basically, so just intuitively tell me what you think, what you learned from the experiment in terms of what are the factors which create cooperation. Three experiments there.
So with respect to our experiment, it was the severity of the situation. Like if they think that it's important to build a hospital or to have defense, that matters. And also group, how big.
See, now we are going to analyze this in the context of the climate change catastrophe. So the severity of the situation is massive. The whole planet is being destroyed.
Yes, sir, but the people don't realize it.
I think there is widespread.
हमारा experiment था, उसमें ये था कि हमने यानी कि जो लोगों से हमने कहा था कि हमने कार्बन एमिशन को कंट्रोल करना है.
ठीक है.
तो हमने कहा था कि इसके लिए हमें पॉलिसीज बनानी है, प्रॉपर स्टेप्स लेने हैं, कोई प्रैक्टिकल स्टेप लेने हैं, तो आप लोग इन्वेस्ट करो ताकि हम प्रैक्टिकली स्टेप लें. लेकिन वो लोग कार्बन, इनके वो लोग एमिटर नहीं थे, इनके वो जो फैक्ट्री प्रोड्यूस कर रही है कार्बन एमिशन.
तुमने इस तरह से फ्रेम किया था.
यस सर, हमने इस तरह फ्रेम किया था.
सही है.
तो सर उन लोगों का ये था कि कुछ लोग जो है ना कॉपरेट कर रहे थे, ठीक है इन्वायरमेंट जो है ना, वो इन्वायरमेंट हमारे जो सिर्फ तमाम ह्यूमन बींग्स को ना अफेक्ट कर रहा है, तो हमें जो है इन्वायरमेंट फ्रेंडली पॉलिसीज अपनानी चाहिए, इस पर उन्होंने इन्वेस्ट किया. लेकिन एक पॉइंट आया, उन्होंने इन्वेस्ट करना कम कर दिया. उन्होंने कहा कि हम कार्बन एमिशन एमिटर्स नहीं है, ये फैक्ट्रीज हैं, तो आपको उन फैक्ट्रीज से कहें कि उनसे.
But you see, this is very strange. This is what because it doesn't matter कि वो emitters हैं कि नहीं हैं. The social optimum was for everybody to contribute everything in that game.
तो सर उसमें हमारे
So why weren't you able to explain that to the people?
बेसिकली ह्यूरिस्टिक प्रॉब्लम है, कोई समय कैलकुलेशन नहीं कर सके तो वो कैसे करते बेचारे.
सर 6 थे
नहीं तो what you could have calculated and showed them कि if everybody contributes everything, everybody will get the maximum benefit.
देखिए सर, फिर फ्री राइडर जो अगर फ्री राइड करता, वो मेरे भी सब लोग भी समझते थे कि अगर फ्री राइड करता, सबको पता है कि सोशली हमें कितना मिलता है, लेकिन एक फ्री राइड करता, ही विल गेट मोर आउट ऑफ इट. एंड सेकंड सर, मेरे में था डिफेंस और वो आई आस्क्ड देम कैटेगोरिकली, मैंने आपको कहा कि सर आपके बच्चे मर जाएंगे, आपके बालें मर जाएंगे अगर आपने डिफेंस में ना दिया. तभी आप पूरा क्यों नहीं कर रहे, मतलब 10.10 यूनिट्स क्यों नहीं दे रहे?
सर हमारे पास जो है ना 6 लोग थे,
हाँ.
इसमें से पहले तो सारे कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहे थे, इसमें से 3 फ्री राइडर हो गए. उन्होंने कहा कि हम तो एमिटर हैं.
हाँ.
जो बाकी 3 थे, उन्होंने इस चीज को रियलाइज किया कि नहीं, इससे सोशल बेनिफिट ज्यादा है, ठीक है, जो हमारा एनवायरनमेंट इतना जो है ना खराब होता जा रहा है, उससे हम लोग इफेक्ट हो रहे हैं.
सही.
उन्होंने कंट्रीब्यूट किए रखा. लेकिन एक
सही.
टाइम आया जब उन्होंने देखा कि फ्री राइडर हमारी वजह से एंजॉय कर रहे हैं,
हाँ.
तो उन्होंने भी जो है ना वो कम करना शुरू कर दिया.
सही.
कम करनी शुरू कर
मेरे
दी.
में ये नहीं था सर, मैं डिफेंस में उन्होंने कहा कि आप कभी
और
नहीं सोचते.
तीसरे ग्रुप का क्या वो है?
सर मेरे ख्याल से ये है कि फ्री राइडिंग में इंसेंटिव तो है, पैसे बचते हैं, लेकिन अगर पोस्टिंग अगर इसमें include
नहीं मगर
किया
देखो ना,
तो
this is the standard prisoner's dilemma. If everybody contributes everything, everybody yani social optimum, everybody is maximizing the total benefits and individual benefits भी maximize उसी तरह से होती हैं. मगर हाँ free riding से जो है वो यानी there is a conflict between private incentive and social incentive.
जो है ना वो ये चाहते प्रॉब्लम का सोल्यूशन में कंट्रीब्यूट नहीं करना चाहते, लेकिन अगर पोस्ट करें वो तो फिर वो करते हैं, मतलब अगर किसी को ना पता चले कि कौन कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा है तो उनकी कोशिश ये है कि हम ना करें.
Alright, so
When the social benefit exceeds the private benefit, the chances of cooperation are small. Because it's like deforestation or even climate change. When you think you have a wooded land, you can cut the trees, grow crops on it. That will pay you more. Whereas the tree cover would be more beneficial for the activities downstream and overall for the environment. So in this case, it's a typical case where the social benefit of a forest is greater than the private benefit to the owner, private benefit going to the owner. So where the social benefit exceeds private benefit, chances are people will opt for personal benefit instead of cooperating.
Sir,
And secondly, it depends on the power structure of the group as well. If you have a group in which one person is powerful to change outcomes or has a veto power, like in the Security Council you have 5 people, nation has veto power. They can change outcome as well, and it's very difficult for them to cooperate, bring them to a table when think of Trump. His stance on Paris Agreement. He just says, "I'll do what is good for America." That's my election motto. So cooperation would be difficult when the structure of power is different. It's not a homogeneous group. One of the few things that.
सही है. There are many factors and some of them Lubna has mentioned. So now I'll go through this article that I mailed to you. I was actually planning to discuss it, but I had the time in this morning to make up the slides to cover the points, so I thought I will give a systematic presentation of this, which shows us, and basically I want you to run these experiments again after you learn these things to see, to achieve, you have to, I want you to achieve this control. I want you to be able to, in a small experiment, have full cooperation and also have full failure of cooperation. That means that you understand the factors of cooperation and the factors. So basically, just to go over this article, I'm just outlining what he says. He starts by mentioning Garrett Hardin, Tragedy of Commons, very enormously influential paper. And basically what the paper says is that if you have commons, then there will be overgrazing, and that will destroy the crops, and then all the cattle will die. And if there's oceans, there will be overfishing, and oceans will be depleted, and same thing for earth. So the problem, the solution, he says, is that have government control. Now actually the biggest commons problem we are facing today as mankind is the environmental collapse, which threatens that maybe the next generation of human beings will not be able to live. There's a very important book, Sixth Extinction, by Elizabeth Colbert, which shows what has already happened, and in terms of half of the species have been destroyed, and in massive destruction on a scale which is unimaginable. Jared Diamond has shown that societies can collapse because they fail to respond adequately to the challenges which come up, and so far mankind as a whole has this we have not responded adequately, and the reason is that there is no one actor who can take charge. And so this Battersby article which we are discussing, so the greatest tragedy is the climate change. Even though we all know what's happening, real action has not been taken, even though it would have been possible to stem quite cheaply in early stages. Magar private incentives did not match the social incentives, and so because of that this has been building up, and it's now in nearly irreversible state. The polar caps are melting, and China is planning for a route through the polar ice, and people are planning that Karachi will be under the water, so, and many other cities, coastal cities. So we have to plan like that, because apparently we cannot prevent climate change, even though it's all entirely man-made. So Hardin's solution was that government should take over and make rules and regulations, but this does not seem to work from historical experience. If we look at Pakistan, the government has done lots of regulations in water, this, that and the other, and it doesn't help. And the historical picture shows that there are many examples where people have worked out rules to deal with the commons fairly, and so basically this is the area where economics is very weak, because social norms can emerge, agreements can emerge, but economists don't know anything about this, because they don't see the answer to your question as to why framing matters is because people's motivations are not purely by money. They have social motivations, they have reciprocity, trust. All of these characteristics are parts of human behavior which are just as reliable, in fact more reliable than the desire for more money. So this is a mistake in economic theorizing, that they think that everybody is homo economicus, when in fact people are not homo economicus. So the question of how people cooperate, this is a question in which economists have a major blind spot, because they don't have the right model of human behavior. So that's why it's possible for us to make contributions. This is not something which has been studied very much. So basically the historical picture shows that people who have dealt with commons have evolved rules. In the Britain you have a very large collection of terminology and rules and regulations which dealt with the commons prior to the privatization. What are the rights? Can people cut wood? Can people fish? So these were very well defined. And government regulations can mess things up, basically because commons regulation requires a lot of local knowledge apparently. And so the communities which are living in that area are important. And in this line, the seminal work was done by Elinor Ostrom, and some of the results that we will discuss summarize her work. And this is what I want you to do, to use to create better experiments. And the thing for which I asked Lubna here also is that I would like you to plan an experiment with the environmental people which creates a realistic simulation of the current situation and tries to develop solutions based on the ideas that you develop in your experiments on how to get cooperation and what are the things which cause breakup of cooperation. So you will do pilot experiments and then we will try to do a better experiment later. So there was a study by Shui Yan Ten about 47 irrigation systems in which some were government owned and some were farmer owned, and the success ratio in the government owned was only 43% and the farmer owned was 72%. So it seems that the government is not the solution. Rather, we should look towards social solutions created by communities. So Ostrom, after studying a large amount of historical data and generating principles by which you could, that's the other part, that what her work did was create a theoretical framework so that, every situation is different. So how can you analyze common elements? So she did develop a theoretical framework which allowed you to look across a large number of different problems and see the commonalities and then see what are the things which lead to success and what are the things which lead to failure. So one of the things that she finds is that you should have collective decision making. So you should let the students get together and talk to each other and decide. Then also apparently important is that you have to have punishments for those who violate. But even those punishments should not be of the chop off the hand variety. You should have graduated punishments, small punishments for small violations and bigger. This is also important. And allow the people to make their own rules, because actually every situation is different. So you have to give them some flexibility. Don't impose a one-size-fits-all solution on them. So there was this study by Agarwal, which is cited in the paper, that if you allow people, and the communities which are successfully managing their forests actually have better, more prosperous. So there is this idea that we need growth in order to, the idea of growth is in conflict with the environment, and this need not be true. This can be true if corporations are running the world and they are extracting money from environments and running away. But if you have a community which is living there, then it will try to protect the land and it will also try to preserve its own future, and it will. So again, but there are no magic bullets, no one solution which fits all. Each problem is different. So what Ostrom suggests is that we should have polycentric government, means that multiple centers of control. The government does one thing, but the community has a lot of say in this. So multiple layers of control are required in order to create a good solution to the problem. So basically, Elinor Ostrom says that we need to do a paradigm shift. From the economist's point of view, there is one solution to the common problem, which is privatization. Either you give the ownership to the government or you give the ownership to any person, and then with ownership the problem will disappear. But this is not actually correct for a number of reasons, as we have discussed. And if the government takes it, they don't know enough about the local information. If a private party takes it, then they have incentive to maximize extraction to the max, so they don't have incentive to preserve anything for the next generation. So Ostrom developed this new paradigm which we have discussed, And in the last couple of decades, at least partly because of Ostram's work, about 50 national governments have been decentralizing the control of forests, water, rangelands and fisheries. This is according to Agarwal, another paper which is cited. So what we are trying to do here is to learn more about the factors for cooperation and failure, and this research is in its infancy. Because there's complexity of human behavior which we don't know much about, what makes people cooperate, and you learn some of these things in your experiments. You had some people who were very stubborn and refused to cooperate, and other people who were very altruistic and cooperated even when others were not. So in the one experiment by Agarwal, he looked at the group size. So he looked at forest in National Reserve in China in a particular part, and he assigned groups to protect the forest by monitoring, but they make their own rules for how they will monitor. It can be one person gives shifts, or they can rotate, or they can do whatever. So he found that group size does matter. 8 to 9 was the optimal group size. If you had less, then they were insufficient, and if you had more, then you had lots of free riding. Another experiment which was done was that this was some other context. I think it may have been forests again. People were given collective material benefits like building parks and roads which were public, or they were given private material benefits. Everybody gets some money or some asset, or they were given information. These were 3 different types of incentives. So it turned out that collective material, so again, so what do you think? Which one would work best? Maybe I gave it away, but I didn't say this. Yes, collective material benefits worked best. Private material benefits had sometimes plus and sometimes minus. And information, much to the surprise of the experimenter, had a negative effect. So it's not clear why that is. And he concludes that more study of human motivation is needed. So if you study the VCM, generally across the world, people have done lots of experiments in voluntary contribution, and they came up with results that were pretty similar to the things that you also got in your experiments. Initially, you see high levels of cooperation, and then there are some free riders. So because people see other people free riding, then they tend to drop out. That okay, and they observe that he is getting benefit at our expense. So eventually everybody tends to drop out, because as dropouts increase, then the benefits from cooperation decrease, and so ultimately you get to low levels of cooperation. So one of the fixes that is possible is to name and shame the defectors. This is actually what Paris Accords are doing, that the country should make pledges, and there will be reviews in which we will hold you accountable that you didn't fulfill your pledge. But the experiments show that this doesn't work. You can name and shame, and people are pretty shameless. So the solution that seems to work is to change the game. Change the game by creating another type of change the incentive structure so that cooperation actually pays some benefits, instead of forcing people that okay, we all have to suffer, and how do we share suffering. So basically what the Barrett, who is reviewing this research, whose research is being reviewed, he has done a lot of experiments in this, and he said that countries are good at coordinating behavior but not at cooperating. This idea of sacrificing for the mutual good, this doesn't work. So what does work is that if we say we will all do X, and whoever does X will benefit from doing, and whoever deviates from this will be hurt. So those who so cooperators should derive some benefit from being in the group. So we need to create a climate club. Those who do not join the club should lose. Now there are some very practical, like we could have a free trade zone. But there are some very practical problems in arriving at this solution, in the sense that what are the kind of punishments that you can devise that will not punish the person who is punishing? Like, for example, suppose we consider a situation where we create a climate club and America does not join. Can we collectively cause damage to America? I think it's definitely true that it is possible for the rest of the world to cause damage, but in such a way that they themselves are not damaged. This is the second problem. So technically, practically, politically, there are some serious problems, but there are some ideas which can be used to construct solutions. So that is my presentation of this article.